The office was abuzz with anticipation as the annual corporate party loomed. It was the highlight of the year, a chance for colleagues to let their hair down, network, and bask in the festive spirit. I remember adjusting my tie in the restroom mirror, mentally rehearsing the surprise I had planned for my wife, Emily. We both worked for the same company but in different departments, a dynamic that had been both exciting and challenging over the years. Tonight, however, I wanted to rekindle some of the romance we had lost in the monotony of daily life. I had arranged for a small gift, a diamond necklace, to be presented to Emily during the party. It was symbolic, a gesture to remind her of our shared dreams and commitment. As I placed the small velvet box into my pocket, I felt a rush of nervous excitement. Emily had been distant lately, more engrossed in her work and less present at home. I hoped this evening would bridge the growing chasm between us. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. The large banquet hall shimmered with soft golden lights, and the air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and upbeat music. I scanned the crowd for Emily but couldn't spot her amidst the sea of familiar faces. I greeted a few colleagues and made my way to the bar, deciding to wait for her there. After half an hour, I began to feel uneasy. Emily wasn't answering her phone, and no one seemed to know where she was. I recalled seeing her heading toward the main office building earlier in the evening. Curious and slightly worried, I decided to look for her. The main office was quiet, its usual hum of activity replaced by the distant echoes of the party. As I walked through the dimly lit corridors, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Emily wasn't the type to disappear without informing me. I passed by her department's floor and noticed the light in the manager's office was on. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to check. Pushing the door open slightly, my heart sank at the sight before me. Emily was sitting on the edge of the desk, her laughter soft and intimate. Across from her, our department head, Richard, leaned in too close for comfort. The way Richard's hand rested casually on Emily's knee sent a jolt of anger and disbelief through me. I pushed the door open fully, the sound startling them both. Emily's eyes widened, her face draining of color. Richard stepped back, his expression shifting from surprise to a smug nonchalance. "Alex. This isn't what it looks like," Emily stammered, standing up quickly and smoothing her dress. My voice was cold, laced with betrayal. "Then tell me, Emily, what exactly am I looking at?" Richard, ever the opportunist, chuckled nervously. "Alex, let's not jump to conclusions. This is just a harmless conversation between colleagues." "Harmless?" My voice rose, anger bubbling to the surface. I pointed at Richard. "You call this harmless? I trusted both of you." Emily reached out, but I stepped back, my gaze cutting her off. "How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not what you think, Alex. Please, let me explain." But I wasn't ready to listen. I turned on my heel and stormed out, the velvet box in my pocket now feeling like a cruel joke. The festive music from the banquet hall seemed like a distant mockery as I walked out into the cold night air. My mind raced with questions and emotions, each more painful than the last. Emily's betrayal cut deep, but what stung even more was the realization that our marriage, once built on trust and shared dreams, now stood on shaky ground. As I walked aimlessly through the city streets, I knew that tonight had changed everything. The question was, what would I do next? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene in Richard's office replayed in vivid detail. Emily's laughter, Richard's hand on her knee, it was like a broken record that I couldn't shut off. By morning, I was emotionally drained but resolute. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to fall into my lap. Emily came home late, far later than I had expected. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen as though she'd been crying. She looked at me with a mixture of guilt and fear, but I didn't give her the chance to speak first. I want the truth, Emily. All of it. No lies, no excuses, I said, my voice steady but icy. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Alex, it's not what you think. Please, just listen to me. Then start talking, I demanded, crossing my arms. And don't leave anything out. What followed was a flood of words, disjointed, desperate, and riddled with half-truths. She admitted that she had been spending extra time with Richard, but she insisted it wasn't an affair. According to her, Richard had been mentoring her for a promotion. She said he was pushy and sometimes crossed boundaries, but she hadn't known how to handle it without jeopardizing her career. Do you expect me to believe that? I asked, my voice rising. That what I saw last night was just a professional mentorship? Emily's lip trembled. I swear, Alex. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact. But I didn't do anything wrong. Overreact? I snapped. Emily, I walked in on you and your boss in a situation that looked anything but professional. And now you're telling me I'm overreacting? Her silence was deafening. I shook my head and walked out of the room, unable to listen to another word. My gut told me she wasn't being entirely truthful, but I didn't have the energy to push further. Not yet. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. If Emily wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I'd seen enough cop shows to know the importance of evidence, and I had a good place to start. Emily's work email and calendar were synced to our shared computer. While she was out running errands, I sat down and began my search. It didn't take long to find something suspicious. An email chain between Emily and Richard caught my eye. The subject line read, "After hours discussion." My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Richard's tone was flirty, borderline inappropriate. He complimented her dress, her intelligence, her ability to light up a room. Emily's responses were polite but curt, clearly trying to keep things professional. But the further I scrolled, the more uneasy I felt. There were invitations to late-night meetings, thinly veiled under the guise of project discussions. One message stood out. "Let's keep this between us. No need for Alex to worry, right?" My blood boiled. Whatever Emily's intentions had been, Richard clearly had none that were innocent. But the bigger question loomed, why hadn't she shut this down? Why had she kept it a secret from me? Fueled by anger and determination, I decided to confront Richard directly. If he thought he could manipulate my wife and get away with it, he was sorely mistaken. I waited until the end of the workday, catching him as he left the office. "Richard," I called out, my voice steady but cold. He turned, his smug smile faltering slightly when he saw the look on my face. "Alex. To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, feigning friendliness. I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Cut the crap, Richard. I know what you've been doing." He raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean the late-night meetings, the emails, the inappropriate comments." "I know everything," I said, my voice rising. "Stay away from my wife." Richard's expression darkened. "Look, Alex, I think you're overreacting. Emily and I have a professional relationship. Nothing more." "Professional?" I scoffed. "You think I'm stupid? I've seen the way you look at her, the way you talk to her. You're a predator, Richard. And I won't let you ruin my marriage." For a moment, he looked genuinely taken aback. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. "Ruin your marriage? Alex, if your marriage is so fragile that you think a few emails can break it, maybe you should look closer to home." His words hit a nerve, but I didn't let it show. "Consider this your final warning. If I see you near Emily again, you'll regret it." As I walked away, my mind raced. Richard's arrogance only fueled my suspicions. But the most unsettling part was his parting shot. Was there more to this than I knew? And if so, what was I missing? The weight of Richard's words stayed with me like a storm cloud I couldn't shake. What did he mean by, "look closer to home"? Was it a deflection, or was there something he knew that I didn't? My gut told me there was more to uncover, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the full picture. Emily's behavior grew increasingly erratic over the next few days. She would disappear for hours under the guise of running errands, returning home flustered and on edge. When I asked where she'd been, her answers were vague and evasive. It felt like the person I'd married was slipping further and further away from me, and the distance was suffocating. I decided to keep an eye on her movements. One evening, I followed her after she left the house, saying she was meeting a friend. I stayed far enough behind to avoid being seen, my heart pounding with every turn she made. She drove across town to a quiet, upscale neighborhood and parked in front of a large house. My stomach churned as I watched her walk up to the door and ring the bell. A man, someone I didn't recognize, answered, and she stepped inside without hesitation. Who was he? And why was Emily lying about her whereabouts? I waited for over an hour, my mind racing with possibilities, before she finally emerged. Her expression was tense, her body language stiff. She got into her car and drove off, and I followed her back home. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I needed more information before I could act. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. If there were secrets Emily was hiding, I wanted them laid bare. It felt extreme, even invasive, but the trust between us was already shattered. I needed clarity, no matter the cost. The investigator worked quickly. Within a few days, he provided me with photos, emails, and detailed reports. What he uncovered left me reeling. Emily had been meeting with the man I'd seen at the house, a lawyer. According to the investigator, she'd been discussing a separation agreement and exploring her legal options for divorce. The ground beneath me seemed to crumble. Divorce? Emily hadn't breathed a word about it to me. Was this her way of blindsiding me, ensuring she had all her bases covered before dropping the bomb? Anger and heartbreak battled for dominance as I tried to process the betrayal. But there was more. The investigator also found evidence linking Richard to the situation. Apparently, he had referred Emily to the lawyer, even going so far as to accompany her to one of the meetings. It was a betrayal on two fronts, my wife and her boss conspiring behind my back. Fueled by a need for answers, I confronted Emily that evening. I laid the photos and documents on the kitchen table, watching as her face turned ashen. "How long have you been planning this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "Alex, I was going to tell you. I didn't know how." "Don't insult me," I snapped. "You've been sneaking around, meeting with a lawyer, and letting Richard, of all people, help you. What the hell is going on, Emily?" She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she reached for one of the photos. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then explain it to me," I said, my tone icy. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been plotting to leave me." Emily's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Richard, he's been blackmailing me." Her words hit me like a freight train. "Blackmailing you? With what?" She hesitated, tears streaming down her face. "A few months ago, we went to a work conference. I had too much to drink, and Richard, her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. The realization dawned on me with sickening clarity. "He took advantage of you," I said, my voice trembling with rage. Emily nodded, her sobs shaking her shoulders. "He has photos, videos. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd send them to the entire office, to you, to everyone. I didn't know what to do, Alex. I was scared. My mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Richard's smug arrogance, Emily's secrecy, the late-night meetings. It had all been a web of manipulation and control. My anger shifted from Emily to Richard, the man who had not only violated my wife but tried to destroy our marriage. "We're going to the police," I said firmly, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "He's not getting away with this." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "What if he releases everything?" "Then we'll deal with it," I said. "Together. But we're not letting him hold this over you any longer." In that moment, a spark of determination ignited in Emily's eyes. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. It wasn't going to be easy, but we had a plan. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, we began putting our plan into action. Emily and I both knew that confronting Richard head-on wouldn't be enough, we needed evidence. Real, indisputable proof that would expose him for what he was. The thought of involving the police was daunting, but we had no other choice. Richard had gone too far, and it was time to take back control. Emily called in sick to work, and together we combed through every piece of digital correspondence she'd had with Richard. Emails, text messages, even calendar invites, everything was scrutinized. There were moments when Emily had to stop, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of reliving it all. I hated seeing her like this, but I reminded her that every piece of evidence we found was another nail in Richard's coffin. By midday, we had a collection of incriminating emails and messages. But it wasn't enough. Richard's threats and blackmail were carefully veiled, never outright stated. We needed more, something undeniable. That's when Emily remembered the videos. "He showed me one of them once," she said, her voice shaking. "To scare me. He's kept everything on a private server." "I'm sure of it." It was a long shot, but it was all we had. I'd done some work in IT during college and still had access to basic tools for hacking into secure networks. It wasn't exactly legal, but Richard's actions had already broken the law in ways far worse. If this was what it took to protect my wife, I was willing to cross the line. While Emily stayed by my side, I worked tirelessly to breach Richard's server. Hours passed in tense silence as I navigated firewalls and encryption. Every failed attempt brought a wave of frustration, but I refused to give up. Finally, as the sun began to set, I hit the jackpot. The server opened, revealing a trove of files labeled with dates and cryptic titles. Emily's hand tightened on my shoulder as we scanned the files. "That's the one," she whispered, pointing to a video file from the night of the conference. My stomach churned as I clicked it open. The footage was grainy but clear enough to confirm everything Emily had told me. It was sickening to watch, but it was exactly what we needed. We downloaded the file, along with several others that appeared to implicate Richard in similar situations with other women. It was clear that Emily wasn't his only victim. The weight of what we'd uncovered was staggering, but it also steeled our resolve. Richard had built his career on exploiting and manipulating others, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The next day, we went to the police. Emily was nervous, her hands trembling as she recounted everything to the detective assigned to our case. But she didn't falter. I'd never been prouder of her than I was in that moment. The detective listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every word. When we showed him the evidence, he assured us that they would launch a full investigation. News of Richard's misconduct spread like wildfire through the company. He was suspended pending the investigation, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Whispers of other victims began to surface, women who had been too afraid to speak out until now. Emily's courage had given them a voice, and together, they were determined to hold Richard accountable. But the fallout didn't stop there. Richard, desperate and cornered, decided to fight back. He filed a countersuit against Emily, claiming defamation and breach of privacy. It was a bold move, one that sent shockwaves through the company and added a new layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. We hired a lawyer, a fierce and determined woman named Laura who specialized in cases like ours. Laura was relentless, tearing apart Richard's claims with precision and exposing his lies in court. The trial was grueling, filled with moments that tested our patience and resolve. But with every passing day, it became clearer that Richard's facade was crumbling. The turning point came when one of Richard's former assistants took the stand. She'd worked closely with him for years and had first-hand knowledge of his unethical practices. Her testimony was damning, painting a picture of a man who had spent his career exploiting those around him for personal gain. It was the nail in the coffin. The court ruled in our favor, dismissing Richard's countersuit and awarding Emily damages for emotional distress. But the real victory was seeing him led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his smug arrogance replaced with a look of utter defeat. Justice had been served. As we left the courthouse, the weight of the past weeks began to lift. Emily and I exchanged a glance, both of us knowing this was far from over. The headlines would die down, the company would recover, but our lives would be forever changed. That evening, as we sat in the living room, Emily turned to me, her voice quiet but resolute. "We've done so much, Alex. But what happens next?" I squeezed her hand and met her gaze. "We finish this together." The days that followed the courtroom victory were a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. On the surface, it seemed like we'd won. Richard was behind bars, his empire of manipulation and deceit dismantled. Emily's courage had inspired others to come forward, and their voices had strengthened the case against him. Yet, deep down, I knew our battle wasn't over. The first crack appeared when Emily received an anonymous message on her phone late one evening. It was a single sentence, "You think this is over?" Attached was a photo, a blurry image of Emily and me walking out of the courthouse. My blood ran cold. Someone was watching us. Who could have sent this? Emily asked, her voice trembling. "It's someone tied to Richard," I said, my jaw tightening. "He may be in jail, but he's not without allies." The next few days were a blur of paranoia. We changed our routines, avoided familiar places, and installed security cameras around the house. I hated living like this, constantly looking over our shoulders, but the alternative was unthinkable. Whoever was behind the message wanted to scare us, and it was working. One evening, as I reviewed the security footage, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A dark car had been parked across the street for hours. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. When I stepped outside to confront whoever was inside, the car sped off, tires screeching into the night. Emily's fear was palpable. "Alex, what if they're planning something?" "They won't get to us," I said firmly. "But we need to take this seriously." We contacted the police again, sharing the message and details of the car. They promised to increase patrols in our area, but I could tell they didn't have much to go on. We were on our own. Then came the second message. This time, it was delivered to our front door in an unmarked envelope. Inside was a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into the computer. A video began to play, and my heart sank as Richard's face appeared on the screen. "Hello, Alex and Emily," he began, his tone as smug as ever. "Congratulations on your little victory. But you didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" The video cut to a series of clips, photos of us at home, at the grocery store, even at the park. Someone had been following us for weeks. The message was clear, Richard's reach extended far beyond the prison walls. "This ends now," I said, slamming the laptop shut. "We're not going to let him terrorize us." The next morning, we met with Laura, our lawyer, and the detective handling Richard's case. The video and surveillance photos were undeniable proof that someone was acting on his behalf. The detective assured us that they would track down whoever was responsible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to take matters into our own hands. Emily, to my surprise, agreed. "I'm done living in fear," she said, her voice resolute. "If Richard thinks he can control us from behind bars, he's wrong. We need to fight back." And so, we did. We hired a private security firm to monitor our home and track the individuals responsible for the threats. Within days, they identified one of Richard's former associates as the driver of the car. Armed with this information, the police were able to make an arrest, dismantling a small network of loyalists still doing Richard's bidding. But the biggest shock came when the detective called us into the station. "We've uncovered something," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were financial records, phone logs, and emails. It turned out Richard had been funneling money to a series of offshore accounts, funding his network even from prison. His connections ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. It was the final piece of the puzzle. With the new evidence, the authorities were able to secure additional charges against Richard, ensuring he wouldn't see the light of day for decades. The arrests of his associates sent a clear message: his reign of terror was over. For the first time in months, Emily and I felt a sense of peace. The threats had stopped, and the shadow that had loomed over our lives had finally lifted. We knew there would always be scars, reminders of what we'd been through, but they were a testament to our resilience. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily reached for my hand. "Alex, I need to say something." Her voice wavered, her eyes searching mine. "What happened with Richard at the conference?" "I know I was drunk, and I didn't consent, but I also let myself be in that situation. I let it happen, and I'm so sorry for everything it's caused." I exhaled deeply, the pain of her words mingling with the empathy I'd been trying to hold on to. "Emily, what Richard did was not your fault. You didn't deserve any of this. But trust is hard to rebuild. It's going to take time." Her tears fell silently, and she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I don't want to lose you." I reached over and wiped away her tears. "We've been through hell and back," I said softly. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger together. This is your second chance, Emily. Don't waste it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a warm golden glow, I felt a tentative hope begin to grow. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like we were walking it side by side, ready to face whatever came next.